eugenics plan caught on camera.
$10 billion over the next 10 years to make it the year of the vaccines. What does that mean exactly?
Well, over this decade, we believe unbelievable progress can be made, both inventing new vaccines and making sure they get out to all the children who need them. The benefits there in terms of reducing sickness, reducing the population growth. It really allows the society a chance. Reducing the population growth.
So what's wrong with the population? I mean,
we're too many people. That's why we have global warming.
Reducing the population growth.
The negative impact of population growth. The United Nations can and should play an essential role in helping the world find a satisfactory way of stabilizing world population. The United Nations can and should play an essential role in helping the world find a satisfactory way of stabilizing world population.
Rick, what does population stabilization mean, and how do you seek to enforce that?
Well, we're not the epigones of Malthus, as some would have you believe, but the world population is a concern. The Associated Press just has an article today saying that the world population is going to reach 7 billion people by the year 2012. We're 6.7 billion people today.
Hey, good to see you. Just a simple question. What did you mean by depopulation should have been the priority of U.S. foreign policy against the third world? Shane, me, I'm not wanted for mass murder in different countries, unlike you, sir. How does it feel? All the millions, all the dictatorships, all the overthrows.
We'll be held accountable for them one way or another.
Our idea is have a plan, Rick. You're spouting off things from an office in California. This is my question. You're saying something very controversial here, and I hope people understand what you're saying. You think there should be fewer people in the United States. I'm trying to figure out which people are the undesirables. And you pointed out you think immigrants are undesirable.
Aerosol geoengineering looks like it is so cheap that the cost is basically not going to be an issue. That means that implementation decisions will be risk-to-risk decisions. But I think the more we do research, the less easy this will look, the more complicated the environmental effects will look. And that's a good thing, because right now it looks too easy. So I think that if we do more research, we're likely to find out that it's harder and more complicated than we thought, and the side effects are harder to manage. And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard. It's more like free riding on our grandkids. And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard. It's more like free riding on our grandkids.
Upwards of 80% of key US-grown foods like corn are already genetically modified. When GMOs get from the lab to the table, doctors and scientists consistently warn of extremely serious effects.
Every single independent study conducted on the impact of genetically modified food shows that it damages organs, it causes infertility, it causes immune system failure, it causes holes in the GI tract, it causes multiple organ system failure.
25, 30, 35 years ago, no one was allergic to anything. And now everything. I have people that are allergic to parsley.
When you link it to the GMO issue, it resonates like you would not believe.
On leaving Microsoft, Bill Gates bought $23 million of Monsanto shares. Globally, he now promotes GMOs and a vaccines collection he calls the solution for the world. Gates has been recorded explaining this solution is actually to cut the world's population.
Now, the world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. The density in the poor areas is greater than they can grow the food. The benefits there in terms of reducing the population.
Maketh to stagger like a drunken man. So we have it in the age of Dionysus, the Kal age. And who are the philosophers who brought this about? Well, Thomas Malthus, in his own words, says, in his essay on population, instead of recommending cleanliness to the poor, we should encourage contrary habits. We should crowd more people into the houses and court the return of the plague. But above all, we should reprobate specific remedies for ravaging diseases. And those benevolent but mistaken men who have thought that they were doing a service to mankind by projecting schemes for the total extirpation of particular disorders. If by these and similar means the annual mortality were increased, we might possibly, every one of us, marry at the age of puberty and yet few be absolutely starved. When we come to eugenics and Charles Darwin, he writes in his own words, "Excepting in the case of man himself, hardly anyone is so ignorant as to allow his worst animals to breed." Eugenics, which was selective breeding or racial hygiene, is not, however, a Nazi or a German phenomena, but a British and American one. Hundreds of people were systemically and legally sterilized in the United States from 1907 on. The most influential eugenicist was Sir Francis Galton, the cousin of Charles Darwin. He was an honorary president of the Eugenics Society for several years. His successor was Major Leonard Darwin, son of Charles Darwin, and it was he who strongly promoted the eradication of the unfit. The first U.S. Eugenics Society was headed by Averell Harriman's mother. It was also funded by the royals, as was the entire Harriman dynasty. Ernst Rudin, Hitler's eugenics expert and chief engineer, was a guest of Mrs. Harriman in America before the advent of the Second World War. In 1905, Dr. Ernst Rudin founded a German eugenics society called the Society for Racial Hygiene. Later he changed the name, adding the word suggested by Francis Galton, the Society for Racial Hygiene, that is eugenics. In 1925, Leonard Darwin wrote an article for the Journal of the Eugenics Society, the Eugenics Review, pushing the idea of locking up everyone whose genes might be considered defective. To save the human race, he said, force or compulsion would be necessary in many cases. He promoted a policy that he called segregation, but he did not mean segregating whites from blacks. He meant separating the fit from the unfit. Compulsion is now permitted if applying to criminals, lunatics, and mental defectives, and this principle must be extended to all who, by having offspring, would seriously damage future generations, he argued. The leaders of the progressive movement in Britain also supported negative eugenics. The people who had founded the London School of Economics, that's Sidney and Beatrice Webb, were also leaders of the Fabian Society. The Fabian Society later became one of Britain's major political parties, the Labour Party. As early as 1909, the Fabians, led by the Webbs, said, "What we as eugenicists have got to do is to scrap the old Poor Law with its indiscriminate relief of the destitute as such and replace it by an intelligent policy of so altering the social environment as to discourage or prevent the multiplication of those irrevocably below the national minimum of fitness." In 1930, a Fabian leader, Archibald Church, introduced a bill for eugenic sterilization. So here we have the Fabians, here we have top politicians, here we have the founder of evolution theory, the elites of British society, deciding who will live and who will not, and the manner in which they will administer the torture to the unfit. The Fabian Society itself was founded in 1883 and played a catalytic role, preaching the inevitability of gradualness in the movement towards a socialist society, taking their name from the Roman warrior Fabius, who learned to wait patiently before striking a fatal blow against Hannibal. In America, John Foster Dulles, Senator and Secretary of State under Eisenhower, has this to say: "It is only by eliminating the lower members of the human race that the higher average is maintained." And Jacques Cousteau, UNESCO courier, on November 1991 said, "The United Nations goal is to reduce population selectively by encouraging abortion, forced sterilization, and control human reproduction, and regards 2/3 of the human population as excess baggage, with 350,000 people to be eliminated per day." And the master of them all, Bertrand Russell, in his Impact of Science on Society, had this to say: "At present, the population of the world is increasing at about 58,000 per diem. War so far has had no very great effect on this increase, which continued throughout each of the world wars. War has hitherto been disappointing in this respect, but perhaps bacteriological war may prove effective. If a Black Death could spread throughout the world in every generation, survivors could procreate freely without making the world too full. the state of affairs might be unpleasant. But what of it? We have Prince Philip, quoted in the Deutsche Presse Agentur in August 1988, said, "In the event I am reborn, I would like to return as a deadly virus in order to contribute something to solve overpopulation." Now, the Institute of Human Virology, we read that according to top pharmacologist Dr. Robert B. Strecker, MD, PhD, the leading scientist of the project, that AIDS virus was created at Fort Detrick, but was based on research first conducted at the Lebedev Institute near Moscow, which was founded by the world's leading virologist, Gurvich. The number of those infected doubles every month. Over 23 million Americans are already affected. In the Strecker Memorandum, in the 30s and 40s, the Public Health Service openly experimented and monitored black men infected with syphilis in Tuskegee, Alabama. Even after penicillin was discovered, these men remained infected and were not treated. Hence, their wives and sons were likewise infected. These incidents are recorded in detail in the book Bad Blood by James Jones. Between 1959 and 1970, there were over 300 biological experiments conducted on U.S. citizens unbeknownst to them. The extent of the program is revealed in the book A Higher Form of Killing by Paxman and Harris. That's from Dr. Robert Strecker's The Strecker Memorandum. Now here it is on DVD. This doctor, Dr. Robert Strecker, conclusively proves that AIDS was vector-borne, that AIDS was a man-made designer disease to create havoc in the world, exactly according to the policies of Bertrand Russell and Aldous Huxley and his coterie. This is absolute compulsory viewing. The Strecker Memorandum by Dr. Robert Strecker. He was one of the first people to work on the AIDS virus and knows everything there is to know about it. In The Final Revolution, Aldous Huxley says, "It seems to me perfectly in the cards that a euphoric drug, far more efficient and less harmful than alcohol, may be produced. And if this should be introduced into every bottle of Coca-Cola, then clearly, as I ventured to point out more than 25 years ago in Brave New World, this would become an incredibly powerful instrument in the hands of a dictator. What is becoming, I think, quite clear now is that dictatorships of the future probably will not be based on terror, as the dictatorships of Hitler and Stalin. Terror is an extremely wasteful, stupid, and inefficient method of controlling people. In Brave New World, the distribution of this mysterious drug, which I called a soma, was a plank in the political platform. Dr. Wright refers to inoculation against smallpox in the British Isles as an ancient practice. And a citizen of Wales, aged 99 years old, states that inoculations had been known and used during his entire lifetime, but that she got smallpox through her inoculation. In Birmingham, England, from 1871 to 1874, there were 7,706 cases of smallpox. Out of these, 6,795 had been vaccinated against the disease. A select committee of the Privy Council convened to inquire into the Vaccination Act of 1867. As 97.5% of those vaccinated died of the disease. Now, Dr. Charles Crichton, in 1884, he is asked to write an article for the Encyclopedia Britannica on vaccination. After much research internationally, he concludes that vaccination constituted a gross superstition. In 1896, Italian professor Carlo Ruta states that vaccination is a worldwide delusion and an unscientific practice with consequences measured today with tears and sorrow without end. Joseph Lister introduced sanitation to the surgery and hospital, but was fiercely resisted by leading surgeons and doctors. The British Medical Association dedicated itself to attacking his name, reputation, and theories. In 1850, a British physician reads a paper detailing the microscopic examination of food products, revealing that all food products examined in Britain were adulterated with foreign substances, including chemicals. W.B. Clark from the New York Press in 1909 says, "Cancer was practically unknown until the cowpox vaccination began to be introduced." He says, "I have seen 200 cases of cancer, and I never saw a case of cancer in an unvaccinated person. On the question of fluoride, in 1943, researchers from the U.S. Public Health Service examined the health of the residents of Bartlett, Texas, to see if the 8 parts per million of fluoride in their drinking water was affecting their health. It was checked again in 1953. They find that the death rate in Bartlett was 3 times higher than a neighboring town which contained only 0.4 parts per million of the fluoride. Dr. James W. Wardner, in his book Unholy Alliances, says the London Office of Strategic Affairs, that's the OSS from which developed the CIA, was run by David K. E. Bruce, an employee of Averell Harriman from the 1920s. Through Bruce and other connections, Averell Harriman dominated all American intelligence functions in wartime Britain. David Bruce was the husband of a Pittsburgh Mellon heiress. Allen Dulles had been the player for the Mellons' big international oil ventures, and eventually the law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell took over the management of the entire Mellon family fortune. It was through the Mellons that fluoride began to be promoted and dispensed into the America's water supply. Now, Ghislaine Langtot, in her book The Medical Mafia, writes, at a CIA hearing, Dr. Gottlieb, a cancerologist, admitted having dispersed in 1960 a large quantity of viruses in the Congo River in Zaire to pollute and contaminate all the people who used the river as their source of water. Dr. Gottlieb was named to be the head of the National Cancer Institute. François Mitterrand, the president of France, says, the health of citizens is a commodity which is bought and sold. And mind control advocate Dr. Jose Delgado, in his book Physical Control of the Mind Towards a Psycho-Civilized Society, simply puts it this way: man does not have the right to develop his own mind. Now, the annual death toll from synthetic prescription drugs, both from the correctly prescribed and the incorrectly prescribed, amounts to about 231,000 deaths every year. To put this into perspective, this is the equivalent of a World Trade Center disaster every week for over a year and a half, or the crash of 2 fully loaded 747 aircraft every day of the year. Drug deaths caused by physicians, the 3rd leading cause of death in the United States. It is far ahead of accidents, drunk driving, homicides, airline accidents, as well as all other disease. Jimmy Carter says, doctors collectively have done more to block adequate medical care for people of this country than any other single group. And Linus Pauling, the Nobel laureate, says, everyone should know that the war on cancer is largely a fraud. Now, it turns out that the term or word Medici, refers to the 13th century Florentine patrician family who became one of the most powerful bankers as well as patrons of the arts and who provided many tyrannical popes. This word, the Medici, actually comes from that, meaning medical doctors. So again, here we have the age-old connection, coming down from the Venetians, coming down from the Phoenicians, coming down from the ancient Sumerians. We have the families related, descended by blood from these ancient sources. And they're still up to their business, right down into modern times, massacring, creating rituals, treating people as if they're just cattle ready for sacrifice.
In Darwin's The Descent of Man, published in 1871, he speculates on the effect of modern medicine on the future course of human evolution. With savages, the weak in body or mind are soon eliminated. We civilized men, on the other hand, do our best to check the process of elimination. Thus, the weak members of civilized society propagate their kind. This, argues Darwin, must be highly injurious to the race of man. Excepting in the case of man himself, hardly anyone is so ignorant as to allow his worst animals to breed. In Britain, the family planning movement, led by the scientist Marie Stopes, is preoccupied with the supposed threat to the health of the race posed by uncontrolled breeding. Marie Stopes' work on birth control, wise parenthood, first published in 1918, is dedicated to all those who wish to see our race grow in strength and beauty. Stopes is concerned with the tendency revealed by the national census for the lower classes to produce more children than the upper classes. The numbers of our population, she states, increasingly tend to be made up from the less thrifty and the less conscientious. In America, the compulsory sterilization of the mentally handicapped, of alcoholics, and of persistent criminals has been legal in certain states since 1907. Marie Stopes advocates similar policies for Britain, including the sterilization of male children with an epileptic or mentally handicapped parent, uncle or aunt. The family planning movement is part of a broader movement aimed at directing and accelerating the evolution of the human race by selective breeding. This new science calls itself eugenics. Developed in the occult teachings of Madame Blavatsky and Guido von List, has by the late 1920s spread throughout Europe, the United States and Britain. And with it, fascination with the swastika. The Stories of India by the British author Rudyard Kipling appear emblazoned with the seal of the swastika. In Scotland, the discovery of swastika markings in a Pictish cave inspired the creation of the swastika kilt pin. In the United States, costly earrings and brooches appear in the form of the swastika. During the Great War, the British War Savings Drive has a swastika as its official emblem. Its administrators are awarded swastika lapel badges in recognition of their services to the nation. By 1930, members of the British Druidic cults display swastikas on their ceremonial robes. In 1932, an English periodical appears with the title The Superman. It is devoted to physical culture, and on its cover is a border of swastikas. The Superman, as well as features on sport and health, carries articles by respected British scientists, warning of the racial contamination of Saxon Britain telepath, Madame Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. In 1888, Madame Blavatsky publishes a book, The Secret Doctrine, in which she claims that deep in an underground Himalayan monastery, she has been shown an ancient occult text. In it were revealed the mystical secrets of the universe and the future course of human history. In The Secret Doctrine, Madame Blavatsky describes the universe as having fallen from pure spirit into base matter, darkness, and chaos. But soon it will rise once more to reach the pinnacle of spirituality. Madame Blavatsky claims that this knowledge and more she has learned through initiation into the mysteries of 7 esoteric symbols. Of these 7 symbols, one she believed to be more potent than any other. The symbol is the swastika. In Tibetan mythology, the swastika is the sign of Agni, the god of the sun, of fire, and of creation. And always, whether clockwise or anti-clockwise, whether curved or straight-armed, it is the symbol of good fortune. For Madame Blavatsky, each cycle of creation has associated with it 7 stages of human evolution. Stages she calls root races. The race which will begin once more, the ascent from darkness to the light of the spirit, she names Aryan. In the occult teachings of Madame Blavatsky, the sign of the Aryan is the swastika. Socialist republics have been declared in both Munich and Berlin. Yesterday, we experienced the collapse of everything which is familiar, dear, and valuable to us. I am determined to pledge Thule to this struggle. Our god is Valvata. His rune is the Arun. The Arun signifies Aryan, primal fire, the sun, and the eagle. Thule will fight until the swastika rises victoriously out of the icy darkness.